Hello everyone. Today we will be learning how to draw anime and manga girls. A disclaimer before we start, I am going to be using Clip Studio Paint for this tutorial. However, you can use any art program. You can even just do it traditionally. I don't have any means to actually record doing a traditional drawing, so that's why I'm opting for a actual art application. But either way, I'll do my best to just walk you through the steps that I use when I am drawing characters, whether it's fan art or otherwise. So for starters, what we want to do is I've got my program here. I've got two different layers. I've got my bottommost layer at 30% opacity. That way, while I'm drawing, everything will appear much lighter. If you're doing this traditionally, you just really, while you're using your pencil for your construction lines, you're going to want to draw very, very, very lightly, because the first step with our construction lines is going to be changing constantly as you're trying to balance and get proportions correctly. And on top of that, any major changes and such, you're not going to want to erase and still see lines. So just draw very, very lightly. That way you can erase as needed and it's not going to be visible in the finished piece. So for starters, we're just going to sketch in a circle here. Whatever way is easiest for you to do, just go ahead and do that. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle because we're just doing construction lines. I'm going to make my circle smaller though, because it kind of got away from me there. So start there. For the sake of just trying to get this right, I'm going to use my rulers here to establish our center line. So we're kind of going to build the character out around this central line, and this will help us get the balance correct as well as symmetry. So what I'm going to do next is, starting from my circular shape here, the widest points, which is here and here, is where I'm going to start a jawline. And I'm just going to bring it in slightly, like so, from either edge. And here I'm just using a lot of lines, just slowly but surely sketching out the shape that I want, because then when it's time to actually do hard lines, then I can just follow the shape that I like. So again, everything you do in this construction portion does not need to be perfect. We're just trying to get a general shape for our character. So I'm just going to bring this one out a little bit. I'll kind of tidy this up like so, and I'll just make sure that my line is a little bit smoother there. And I will round my character's jaw slightly. Alright. Next, what we'll do is below the head, just see this distance here of your jaw from the base of your circle. It's basically the same distance I'm going to do just below the head. I'm going to put in a line like so. That's going to be our shoulder line. Now, roughly the width of the head here, I'm going to drop in two smaller lines. And from there, I'm going to make a slight egg shape. This is going to be the character's ribs. And I don't want the ribs to be very much wider than the head, and do your best to try to keep it even on both sides. And right here, this little section I just drew in, all right here, is just the base of the rib cage. So now that we've got our ribs established, I'm going to drop in two small circles either side to be our shoulder indicators. Now the finished product is not going to be perfect little circles here, so you don't have to get them perfect. You just want to get them pretty symmetrical, as close as you can. From there, just below the armpit here, just by a little tiny bit, I'm going to just attach these two with a small line, so that way our rib cage is shaped like that. That's just the little pit area. From that pit area, I'm going to add a line. This is where this will help us place our breasts on the character later, since they're going to fall below the shoulder line, like so, like below the pits. Next, what I'm going to do is, following this angle here, I'm going to come up and down for my collarbone. I'm going to erase some of this just so you can see it a bit better. So it kind of comes a shape like that. And that is our collarbone, and bring it up to the top of the shoulder since it's going to be a solid line through there connecting. Next, I will just zoom out and make sure that so far I like the proportions of it. I am just going to lower my head slightly since the collarbone's kind of angled down, so there's a little bit more of a gap than what I would like. Not going to draw in a neck just yet because I may have to shrink the head as we go on. Basically, the rules for establishing how tall your character is done through head height. It's just the easiest way to get everything proportional. On an art application like this, you can just eyeball it and balance things to your liking. If you're doing it traditionally, you can still do that. It's just there's going to be more erasing involved. If you wanted, though, you could, on your paper, mark out lines like this with a ruler, and each of these would fit your entire head in, like so. And that'll help you just set beforehand the height of your character so you can just get a little bit more exact. But for this, I'm just eyeballing it. I'm going to balance it as I go. So right now, I think the head is a little too big. So we're just going to shrink it down slightly. Like so. Next, this portion here, we've got our shoulder line up here. And we're going to drop in a similar line down here. Now, we just want a couple of head heights to fit in. So we've got one head height here, 2, 3. So roughly just over be 3 head heights below the actual head is where I've dropped in my line. You could probably bring it up slightly actually, so it'll be roughly 3.5 head heights. Then for here, we're going to establish how wide the hips are. It kind of just depends on the balance of what you want your character to look like. If you want to be a little bit more sleek or a little bit more curvy. For this, I'm just going to put my hip line slightly inside the edge of the shoulder line. So I'm going to do my best to line that up. Then down here where I basically put my original line, I'm just going to mark out a little section. I'm going to attach these like so. And I use a slightly convex line like this, so it's kind of shaped a little bit rounded like so. From there, we're going to draw out our overall hip shape. So you kind of want to bring it up and over like so. So this section right here and right here is what's going to be visible. And that's going to be just the very edges of the hip bone. So I'm going to get rid of this. Down here at the bottom, I'm going to just mark out a small point. This section, all right here, is completely unmovable, as well as right here. So I'm just going to mark this out, because everything in here is just solid and is not going to be moved or bothered by the rest of our character, so we kind of build her out around it. And how I'm going to attach these is I'm going to follow my rib line down, and I'm going to kind of keep it following its curve at the widest point. This is the outline of our character here. Then from this section right here, where the unmovable hip section starts, I'm just going to attach it like so. Now you can use whatever shape you want here. You can just come over here as another one. You can make it straight, you can make it concave, you can make it convex if your character's got a little bit more weight. You can do a mix of both, which is what I did here, where it's just a little out and in, like so. From there, I'm just going to put in a belly line, so I'm just going to have a line just over our center line, poke out, in, and back out, so it makes this shape. Then, right here, just inside of the very outer edge of our ribs. I'm going to put in little lines. I'm going to follow them down to map out our tummy, like so. So I'm just doing basic shapes like that, and that maps out the stomach area. From there, in this unmovable section here, I'm going to drop in little circles, and I'm just going to do quick straight lines all the way down to the bottom of my page. From here we can actually figure out how tall our character is going to be. So if I put a tiny box down here with some circles above it, this is going to be like where my ankles are and where my feet are. So this isn't a foot tutorial, so I'm just putting in placeholders for my feet. And again, keep in mind that during this first part here, nothing has to be perfect. We're going to work with it until we can make something that you can just trace over. So we're just trying to figure out the height, the weight, the proportions, everything. So we're going to make our character standing in just sort of a classic anime girl pose. We're not doing anything too crazy. This is just helping you figure out proportions, how to mess with your character until it's the right length, height, thickness, whatever you want. So I've just put in some oval shapes down here for our kneecaps. You can make these kind of large compared to, relative to your ankles. And what we're going to do is right here, these little lines that are unmovable spots, we are going to attach our inner thighs right there. So depending on the thickness of your character, they would have a thigh gap or not. For this, I'm going to start with a line that sucks in slightly and then comes back out before coming back in. So it's kind of a shape like that, right? And I'm going to do the same over here. Well, this line's a little bit further away, so I'm just going to bring it in a little. And again, here I'm just using lots of little lines until I finally get a shape that's relatively symmetrical, a shape that I want. The symmetry of your character, you want the balance to be right, so things like, the hips, the weight of your character. If she's just standing straight on us, she's not going to really have one leg longer than the other, so, things like that. In terms of just the overall, just like meat on your character, it needs to be reasonably symmetrical. However, most human beings are not perfectly symmetrical, so it can kind of still help with the charm or realism of your character if it's not just perfect. But if you're trying to make it absolutely perfectly symmetrical, then you're just gonna be spending a lot more time on this part here. But I'm going to now put in my outer thigh, which, coming down from the hip line, so here's my hip, I'm going to just bring it out and then sucking it back in. On our female characters, the widest part of the thigh is going to be almost at the top, not usually at the very, very top. It's going to come down slightly before it peaks, so like right here is sort of the thickest it's going to be. Same on the inside, before it then swoops back in straight, like so. And then I'm going to just do that over here, again with just lots of little lines, because I'm just trying to get to a shape that I like. So we'll kind of bring this shape down a little, like so. This thigh ended up a little bit thicker than the other one, so I'm just gonna kind of shrink it here. There, that is a little bit better. Out slightly. There. And again, construction portion, we're just trying to find the weight here. So, what I'm going to do next is from this inner thigh mark right here, inner thigh, I'm going to actually follow that down and under the knee. So it's kind of tough to see since I have my circle there. So this is my knee circle. So I'm just coming down around it like that. That way we can just trace out our knee. From there, starting at about this point here, inside the knee, we're going to have a slightly concave line. And when I mean slight, I mean so slight that it's basically straight. This is because there's a little bit of curve in the leg bone here so that it can brace for impact a bit better. Then from there, from the outside, I'm going to swoop out and back in for my calf. And again, you can make your calf as large as you want or as small as you want. For this, I'm just going with a medium size, just trying to keep it in proportion with the leg. So you can see they kind of have a leg shape like so. Just a quick sketch. That's just kind of how they make a lot of anime girls standing these days. If you wanted them to have stronger calves, you can add a bump inside, and now the calves are a lot larger. For this, she doesn't have very thick legs. We're kind of keeping her a little bit taller, more drawn out, so we don't really need her to have super thick legs. From there, I'm going to come back up to this part right here, and we're just going to barely see her glutes coming up like so. And the thicker your character is, the more pronounced that's going to be. But for this, she's not overly thick, so we're just going to put in little tiny ones. So from here, we're coming up to our shoulder circle. I'm just giving her a very basic pose, nothing fancy, so I'm just going to keep her arms at her side. So I'm going to draw the center line for my arm. And just below the bottom of our rib cage, so this is where our bottom of our rib cage is, I'm going to put in the elbow socket. That is basically where, on average, most people's elbows fall. Of course, if you're making a fantastical character, or you're making a character with slightly different proportions, they don't have to go there, but on average, that's where they go. From there, I'm going to drop in the forearm center line along with the wrist markings here. Now, if you hold your arm, if we were to drop our own arms down in the same position, pull them up, you'll see that your hand is pretty even with your shoulder. So you want to make sure that your wrist circles here are low enough so that once we put in our hand, it'll be roughly even with the shoulder. And this is not a hand tutorial, so we are just going to put in a placeholder. So I'm just going to put in a little rounded triangle shape like this, kind of like a little mitten. I'm going to bring in a thumb shape, and then I'm just going to sketch in little finger shapes like so. Oops. Well, that thumb got huge on me. Trying to keep her hands kind of small. And this one on the right is a little bit too big, so I'm just going to shrink it. Like that, trying to keep them even. From there, what I like to do in this position is, since this arm right here, the meat of it, the bicep, is actually going to be behind our forearm, I'm going to put in the forearm first. So starting from the base of the thumb, I'm going to come with a straight line that gets wider around the elbow. That's where all the forearm muscle is. I'm going to do the same on the other arm into basically a point. And I'm just going to attach that like so and drop in my bicep. I'm going to do the same here. So you're trying to keep it pretty thin. If you've got a muscular female character, then that of course, will be a little bit more exaggerated there. But for this character, it's going to remain very thin and delicate looking. From there, just going to adjust that. Alright, so now I am just looking at the proportions of my character. I'm trying to see if this is a height that I like. Again, if you're doing this on paper, then this is a good time to just kind of make small adjustments, maybe move your head up, you know, anything like that. For me, I am relatively happy with the size of this character. I'm just going to increase it like this, just so that way it fills the page more. Just because I'm just doing this as a figure study, so I want this to be as big as I can get away with. Makes it a little bit easier for people following along. I'm just going to drop in some ears. Roughly, if you have like just under, like this is halfway on our circle, just under that I'm putting in a brow line. And that's essentially where the top of your ear is going to be. Dropping a little nose placeholder and a mouth. So this isn't a face tutorial either, so we're leaving it relatively undetailed. Now there's a lot of ways you can draw the neck. For me, I like using slightly concave lines like this. You can also use relatively straight lines like so. That's a little bit more realistic actually, where it starts a little bit thicker at the jaw and sinks in a little. That's how a lot of people I see these days are doing it. It's a little bit more realistic that way, but I just kind of like the shape of having them slightly concave, but you can draw them however you want. From there, we're going to draw in her traps. This is going to connect her neck to the shoulders. I draw them out just before the actual shoulder comes out. So if we've got our collarbone, and let's say that's our shoulder there, it'd come like so. Depending on the muscular structure of your character, they're going to be bigger or smaller. On our regular anime girls, they're going to be pretty small, since it's not really a muscle that they're using a whole lot to build up. From here, just going to adjust the balance on my hips because it's a little bit off. And then we will draw in the boob shapes here. So basically, if we have our arm like so, this little pit line is going to just morph into the boob as well, since it falls under that and it basically evens out with the pit. So depending on the size of your character's chest, it's just going to change certain aspects of it. However, for right now, we're going with relatively large chest, but nothing too crazy. So I'm just, again, using tons of little lines because I'm just trying to get a shape that I like. And these are going to look kind of like teardrops. So we're just going to sketch in teardrop shape like that. And because there's no support here, they're not getting pushed into the center line, and they're also not big enough to be in the center line. Like if you had much larger chest, then it would come over like that. But for this, even though it's still a large chest, it's not going to actually cross that center line. So her chest falls just under this shoulder line, or elbow line that I drew earlier. So we're basically just going to try to keep these as even as we can. Again, following that pit, so it's shaped like that. From there, see this one's a little bit too big. Just going to erase some of this. That way in my actual line art portion, I know not to follow that line that's too large. And I'm just going to suck this in a little bit more. Like so. And again, you're just trying to get the balance on this right. But there we go. That's basically what we're looking for. We'll do studies for like faces and stuff like that, and more in-depth studies on certain key areas on our characters. But for right now, we're just trying to get the overall shape, balance, and proportions for a sort of classic anime girl. So Now we will begin the actual line art portion. So now I'm going to go to my new layer. And for people drawing traditionally, just with paper and pencil, you're going to now want to use, you're going to want to be pushing a lot harder. These are going to be the lines that are actually going to remain visible. You could consider using a pen or a art marker as well. That way when you go to fully erase your construction lines, it's not going to mess with your actual lines. However, if you really dig in with a lead pencil, it's really not going to get smudged a whole lot if you've got a good eraser. So keep that in mind. Now's the time to draw firm and accurately, because this is now going to be what our character actually looks like. So what I am going to do is I'm just going to use black since I'm just doing a figure steady. Now if you're trying to follow along to this to position a character for a fan art or something, you would want to consider the color of your line art depending on the warmth of your overall piece. So if you have a very warm piece, very bright colors and such, you're going to want to consider using a very dark red. That'll kind of help match the overall tone of the picture, as well as if you're trying to add highlights to the line art, then you can be using brighter like reds or yellows, and it'll actually blend a little bit better with the line art itself. Whereas if you just use pitch black, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to highlight that and have it look natural. And then on the flip side, if you're doing a very cool one, so it's going to be using like cooler tones, blues and such like that, then you can just use a very dark blue. For this, I'm just going to be using black. So the line art portion here, this isn't a tutorial on line art, line weight, anything like that. I'm just showing you the structure of the character, so I'm really not concerned about using multiple layers for my line art or getting the lines to perfectly connect. I'm just trying to show you what I do to sketch it out. So for this, I'm just kind of going to quickly follow along. So again, I'm just looking for these shapes that I established, and then I'm just trying to follow them as best I can. And I'll kind of try to keep my lines clean for you guys following along. Just going to sketch in little ear shapes here. For this, I'm going to add in the lobe. This I would have done like during the sketching portion, but I didn't think to do it, so I'm just doing it now. Then for this, now what I'm going to do, this will always change as you develop as an artist. You'll have an order of process here that you're going to get used to for actually drawing your character that feels most natural to you. For me, since her chest comes out past her arm and rib cage and such, I'm actually going to start by just dropping in chest shapes like this. Yeah, that one's just terrible. That one's a lot better. And notice how I'm kind of moving quickly when I actually do the line. The reason for that is that if you move too slowly, your line will get really bumpy. Whereas if you just do it quick, then see how much just even and straight it is compared to if I'm trying to do that but slow. It's a lot harder to keep it even and stable. So if you have the line that you like and you have the overall shape that you like, try to just do a fast, accurate line, and it will look a lot better in the finished product. Next, I'm just going to start from my hand here and attach it like so. Add in my little fingers, hand, elbow. From here, I'm going to keep this all one line for the outside. Notice how I came in very slightly. If you go in too deep like this, it makes them look like they've got really muscular shoulders. On the other hand, if you just keep it flat like that, it's just kind of an uninteresting shape. So I add the tiniest concave line, and it gives the shoulder a little bit more pleasant of a shape. So then I'm just going to do the same thing over here. Add in my thumb and finger placeholders. And again, if you're doing this as like an actual drawing that you want to upload or something, or you're not doing a figure study, then you're going to want to be doing your line art on multiple layers. That way, for a case like this right here, where I've got a line that intersected, you'd want to erase it without messing up your other line that is the way that you like. But for this, I'm not concerned about the line art quality because I'm just doing a figure study. Do see that this chest line here is not exactly positioned properly. I'm just going to scoot it in a little bit, tidy this up slightly. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my outside lines here. So my line that follows the rib cage, a quick drop in the belly because that's not going to really get in the way of anything else. This little line right here on top, that's just the base of the ribs. Quick drop in my neck and traps, my little necklines for all the tubes and tendons right there. Next, I will put in the base of my hip as well as the hip itself that you're going to see. I remember I had to make this one wider so it fit better. You can make these real rounded, you can make them real pointed, it's completely up to you. I'm going for a in-between, so it's not quite just rounded, but it's not so rigid either. Typically, if your female characters, keeping them a bit softer and rounded makes them look a little bit cuter. Whereas if you have them a little bit more rigid, it can make them look more athletic or muscular. Then I'm going to attach it here with the little love handle portion, like so. Then I will put in the inside of my leg, like that. Okay, well, that one kind of got messed up. That. Then the outside. Like that. Then I will follow the calf, swooping down both sides. And I'm trying to kind of capture this little section here, so I'm not just attaching it like this. I'm attaching it with a little curve in and a swoop, like what we do on the inner thigh. I'll even these up. Your ankles are higher on the inside than they are on the outside, so I'm just going to drop those in. Then I'm going to attach them to our very basic foot shape here. And again, this is just a placeholder. Attach it like so. Swoop, ankle. Well, this one needs to be raised a little bit. You want to try to keep the ankles pretty even. Then we just need to drop in our glutes here. And there you go. That's the overall shapes that I use to help me construct my anime figures. And then from this portion here, you would just put whatever on top. So if you were having them like in clothes and such, then on your actual construction lines, you would add in whatever you want them wearing here, and before you'd start the line art process. But for this is just a figure study, help us learn the anatomy. So hopefully this is helpful, and in part 2 I will show you the same character but flipped around so you can see the back. So hopefully this helps.